Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for the Merge Faith and Mental Health Summit. My name is Erin Coleman, and I'm here to talk to you all about something that is near and dear to my heart. So the title of my talk today is called Normalize Emotions Again, a Christian perspective of Black mental health. So before we get started, I want to make sure that I do a nice introduction so that you all know who all you're talking to, right? So my name, like I said, my name is Erin Coleman. I consider myself to be a self-proclaimed culture-changing therapist. What does that mean? It means that I have a passion for the Black community. I have a passion for Black mental health. And I believe that there is an opportunity for us to change the culture of how we see and how we interact with our mental health. So that is the goal of what I do in practice. Now, a little bit about me on a personal note. I am born and raised in North Carolina. I'm the second out of four. I am truly a Southern person at heart. I'm going to try to, not say y'all every 2 seconds, but can't help it. Like I said, from the South. When it comes to what I do on a daily basis, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist who works at a local private practice here in my area. And then I also am a clinical supervisor to associate and also fully licensed therapist, as well as master's level counseling interns. So I'm a therapist by day, therapist and supervisor by day. And then at night, I am a doctoral student. So I am a first year doctoral student in Regent University's Counselor Education and Supervision program. So that's just a little bit about me. I like to always introduce myself so people know who they're talking to. Now, let's get into the good stuff. Like I said, I consider myself to be the culture changing therapist, meaning I want to change the culture of Black mental health as it pertains to what's happening in our community. So one of the first things I noticed that, maybe we could use a little help on is our perception of emotions. I think that I could spend all day going into stereotypes in terms of how we handle emotions, what emotions look like. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But before we get into the nitty gritty, I want you to just take a moment, just kind of journey with me for a little bit. I'm going to ask you a couple questions, but it's going to really help you to kind of engage with the material. Okay. So first things first, what are emotions? I'm sure you've probably never had someone ask you this question, but there's a reason that's why I'm asking it. A lot of times we realize that we feel things, but I don't think we actually understand what it means to feel. I don't think we actually understand what it means to have an emotion. So by definition, an emotion is a natural instinctive state of mind deriving from one's circumstances, mood, or relationship with others. So basically all that's saying is that emotions, it is our body's natural response to some type of stimuli. So person, place, thing, event, whatever. Emotions serve as guides and also expressive markers to let us know how our body is basically processing what is happening around us. Okay, so think about your emotion as kind of like a flag of like, whoop, whoop. Hey, something's going on. Hey, we're feeling something. That is the purpose of an emotion. It is to guide you. It is to show you something. It's to point you in a specific direction. Now, the issue with emotions is that everyone doesn't necessarily believe in the existence of them. I'm sure that you have heard one person or another say, I'm not really an emotional person. That's a lie. We are all emotional people, okay? Emotional health is basically the overall quality of your body's ability to identify, to process, and to notice how your emotions are happening. So emotional health, again, it is your body's ability it is the overall quality of your body's ability to identify, to process, and to notice what is happening within your body and how your body is expressing such things. How is your body processing and expressing when you are around a specific person that maybe doesn't make you feel the same way, right? Is your emotional health in a place to where you're able to identify and process that So now that we know a little about what emotions are, we know that our emotional health is kind of like the overall look at how emotions play out in our body. Now I'm going to ask you another question. Have you ever gotten emotional? Just think about that for a second. When I ask this question, I think people initially think that when I'm saying emotional, you're thinking, have I ever been sad? Have I ever cried? Yes, right? When we think about how emotionality is played out in the media and how it's played out on TV, typically when someone is saying, oh, I'm so emotional, it's because they have tears in their eyes. But what if being emotional really was just you being human? I know, like I said, changing the culture. I want to shift how we're thinking about this. Okay. So you being emotional is really just you being human. Everyone has emotions. Now, whether or not they can identify and process them, that's a whole different story. But everyone has emotions. Everyone feels something at some time. To be emotional is to be human. And last time I checked, we were both human, which means that we can both be emotional. Emotions, when I talk about emotions, I mean happy, sad, mad, anxious, irritated, frightened, amused, amazed, scared, lonely. That anger, rage, frustration, ecstatic, those are all emotions. Okay. And so when someone asks you about whether or not you're emotional, your answer should always be yes, because I can guarantee you that every single person who watches this talk has been able to identify one of those emotions in their life. A lot of times people don't identify their emotions because they don't know how to identify with themselves. To have emotional health means to also have a pretty substantial personal identity. It in order for you to have some type of emotional health where you know about yourself, you need to know about yourself. You need to know about how you process, you need to know about how you interpret. And so this is beyond just emotional intelligence, which is your ability to know emotions. This is also about you knowing yourself and you knowing how you interact with the world and how your body responds to that. Now, I want to address something that I've heard people talk about, this idea of, I don't get emotional. Most times I just kind of feel numb to everything. Numb is an emotion. You feel emotions. If you feel numb is an emotion. Now, it may not be in, someone's book of all about emotions, but essentially numbness is a combination of a few different emotions that basically just kind of overwhelm you to the point where it feels like you're not feeling anything, but you're probably feeling multiple things at once. Our mind processes the world through emotions. Okay. This is a natural process. And so when we talk about how we can normalize emotions again, it's really about just shifting your mindset into not, I have to force my body to do this, but my body is doing this regardless, because this is how we process the world. This is how we process interactions with other people. So one of the other things that I would want to, just kind of bring up to the light is the fact that a lot of times people see emotions as a weakness. But how can a bodily function, something that is natural to us, how can we say that that's a weakness? It's not. It's literally a part of our humanity, right? It's a personal skill that we are just born with, to be able to emote, to be able to feel, to be able to express. That's something that no one can take away. It's not a weakness. It's a skill. It's a function. It is literally a part of who we are as humans. So with that being said, that's my rationale for us to why I feel like we need to normalize emotions again. Okay. So keep that saying in your mind. Remember that everyone feels emotions. It's a part of our human bodily function. And we need to just shift our minds to start thinking about how we can normalize it in thought, because our body is already doing it regardless. Now, I want to shift us to talking about how this is playing out specifically in the Black community and within the Black church. In the Black community, one of the things that I like to start with talking about is the historical context of emotions within the Black community. Unfortunately, when we think back to one of the first historical lessons that we learned about the Black community, it's tied to things like slavery and other traumatic events. Now, follow me here. If I have already stated that emotions are humane, it is a part of our humanity, it's a part of our natural function. Think about slaves. Slaves were not really considered human. They were not considered people. They were almost considered, not almost, but they were considered to be pretty barbaric, right? And so that misconception, think about how that shifts the mind even then. So way back then, if a slave is not a person, then how can they have emotions? That's what we were taught. Now, that message that was sent, that is now carried, right? While the idea of being a slave has gone away, now as we go throughout some of these other traumas, so the medical advancement when it comes to Black people being test dummies, I'm automatically thinking about the historical story about, I can't think of the person's name, but about like Black women being operated on when medical providers were trying out hysterectomies and how they weren't giving the Black women any meds during the surgery because they didn't see them as human. They didn't see them as someone who would have some type of emotion, right? Even then, Black women's feelings, their emotional expression was silenced, right? Because they were not considered humans. Think about military. I think about Black people being put on the front lines and being killed first, as if they did not have any emotional reaction to being on the front line. I think about the Tuskegee experiment. I think about all these things of like things that have been done to Black people for generations and things that have basically said, we're going to do this to you, but we don't expect you to have any emotional output. Think about the civil rights movement, right? I'm picturing what was shown to us as Black and white photos of men and women being hosed, men and women being beat, men and women being trampled. Again, all of this trauma is happening as if Black people did not have a reason to respond, as if that they didn't have the capability to respond. And so as this trauma is happening, we are learning for generations to just suppress our emotions. We are learning for generations to push through and to try not to feel. But that's not really what happens. Instead, we tap into something called communal coping. Communal coping is where we as a community, we decide what helps us to move forward. We decide what helps us to heal, what helps us to process, and also what helps us to survive. So we can have positive and we can have negative coping mechanism. Positive can be things like community. It can be things like turning to exercise. It can be things like having the right conversations. Negative can be things like substance use. Negative can be things like perpetuating even more trauma because no one taught you or no one learned, right? But our ability to use this communal coping mechanism, it basically is our way of coping with the emotions that we had not been able to express because no one taught us to do that for generations and generations. Now, this takes us into another area because unfortunately, now we have stereotypes that have been developed. We have the angry Black woman who, again, she seems emotionally invincible because she doesn't show anything. Or we have the passive Black woman who is too afraid to show her emotions. And so she just goes along with whatever someone is saying out of fear that someone's going to judge her. We have the scary Black man who is a threat the moment that we see him, because any type of emotion that he shows, it terrifies us because we don't know what's going to happen next. We have the unruly Black children or baby's kids who don't know how to act, who don't know how to integrate themselves into other social situations because, again, no one taught them how to regulate their emotions. So within the Black community, we have a history of trauma that has taught us basically to try our hardest not to feel. That has taught us to either try not to feel or to try to find some type of mechanism that can distract us from what it is that we're really feeling. This is not a one size fit all, right? I'm not saying that every single Black person is identifying with this. However, this is some of the trends that we notice in the community. Now let's talk about stigma real quick. So because of the emotionality in the Black community, that has led to fear of being judged, of, so what if I do cry? Is someone gonna judge me? Is someone gonna consider me to be weak? Fear of mistreatment. What if I do show some type of emotion? Is someone going to take advantage of me? Is someone going to try to hurt me? Fear of abandonment. Wow. If someone has a really bad day, are they going to leave me because now all of a sudden I'm labeled as crazy? All of a sudden I'm labeled as out of my mind, right? How does this actually show up in our community? Number one, I'm a therapist, so I got to say it. No mental health treatment. We don't have a lot of Black individuals who are running to therapy rooms. They are, again, because of that fear of judgment or that fear of mistreatment, especially with mistrust in the medical system. We don't have a lot of people who are willing to come to therapy to address both the big and the small mental health issues. We have broken families because now we don't know how to have relationships. We don't know how to regulate our emotions to the point where it's safe for us to be in community with someone else. And so we have broken families, we have broken marriages, or we have families that are together, but they aren't the healthiest because we have destructively authoritarian parenting styles, which again, just perpetuate even more trauma. What is that? I'm talking about, if you didn't take out the chicken before your mother got home, you already knew what was going to happen. I'm talking about, if you just happen to say something under your breath, the famous "I'll slap the Black off you," that type of like destructively authoritarian parenting style that invokes even more fear. So we have the generational presence that says be afraid to show emotion, and then now we have this family system that's saying no, but also if you show emotion, I'm going to give you something even more to be afraid of. We have homelessness. Okay, so when we are not, a lot of homelessness and also substance use is tied to mental health issues. Not all of it, but a lot of it, because how we carry our emotions, how we regulate, that often affects our thoughts and also our behaviors, which affects our ability to interact with other parts of society. If any one of those things is not where it needs to be, that can change the whole trajectory of your decision making and of how you conduct your life, which can lead to unfortunate situations, can lead to trauma, can lead to whatever, which can also lead to homelessness. Substance use, which is a part of that communal coping. Unfortunately, having substances that were introduced into the community for whatever reason, it now became a way for us to numb the pain. It became a way for us to escape. And then lastly, spiritual abuse. This is a part of the stigma because the church has not always known how to handle mental health. And part of it, I truly do believe it's just because we don't have a history of knowing what mental health looks like in our community. And so the church is getting better. The church is responding. However, in years past, there have been individuals a part of our community who have suffered from spiritual abuse. What do I mean by spiritual abuse? I mean by they have suffered from pastoral leaders, they have suffered from ministerial leaders, they've suffered from even just other congregants who have dismissed their feelings, dismissed their experience, called them demonic, things of that nature, things that aren't necessarily helpful or even validating, but things that, again, it increases the stigma of, that fear of judgment or that fear of abandonment. The church is not going to want me. The church is not going to let me in. God isn't going to want me if I admit that I'm having some type of emotional trouble. God is going to look down on me. Other people are going to judge my relationship with God if they see that I'm depressed. things of that nature. Oh, I must not trust God because I'm anxious. That is a part of spiritual abuse that oftentimes we end up dealing with. So now that we're talking about the Black church, let's just get into it a little bit, okay? Emotionality in the Black church. Now listen, I'm going to go through the historical context, okay? Again, because I do think that this is important. The Black church has kind of journeyed through a few different stages. We have church as the refuge in the very beginning. So think about slavery times. Church was their safe place. Then we move, and a few decades later, church became the gathering place. It was a place that you saw your family and your friends. Think about how we have generations and generations of families who stayed at the same church, right? Because church became the gathering place for the community. And then now we're looking at church as a spiritual place. So it is the space for us to really not only to seek refuge, to gather and to have community, but to also find God, to also really dig into what our spiritual relationship looks like because of the space that the church offers us. We see emotions come out, or we see them become expressive through preaching. So think about your local pastor, think about whatever their style is. Traditionally, especially, I grew up Baptist, so I'm thinking about the hooping. I'm thinking about the reaching over the pulpit with the mic. I'm thinking about the screaming, all of that type of emotional expression as they get into the text and as they get into the sermon that they're preaching. Singing started off with hymns way back when. And for some of us, we are still singing hymns because of the historical importance that it has. But also nowadays, it's looking like praise and worship. So thinking about, being in worship with your eyes closed, whether or not you are someone who just kind of sits there and takes it in, whether or not you are someone who is snotty nose laying on the altar crying, whether or not you are someone who is screaming to God with joy, whatever it is, but singing, again, that's another way for us to emotionally express. And then dancing. We have liturgical dance, we have miming. Miming is a really great way for us to express emotions because there's no verbal part of it. But then also shouting. Now we know in the church, the saints love to shout, right? But all of these things are ways in which we express emotion in the church without us really realizing it. Now, this is where the stigma comes in. Like I said before, that sometimes we can spiritually abuse some of these principles that turn people away from being able to really acknowledge how their mental health combines with the church. So we have things that have been said like, well, you should just pray about it, or that's nothing but the devil, or you just need to let go and let God, as if you really wanted to, hold on to whatever it was that was bothering you. Because of course, we want to just keep on those things, right? No, some of these sayings are, like I said, they are extremely dismissive, they're extremely hurtful, and they don't really give people a chance to really connect with themselves. In fact, it tells people that you are doing something wrong by having an emotion. You are doing something wrong by having a mental health challenge. When that's not fair, because like I said, these things, this is natural to us, okay? Emotions, that's a part of our humanity. And so we have to be careful in the Black church that we don't over spiritualize things and then end up dismissing something that is very real for people. Now, I want to go on to talking about how does this translate into the scriptures? The first thing to consider is that everyone has what is called primary emotions, okay? These are universally experienced emotions that are expressed as an initial response to an event or stimuli. There are about 6 here. So the happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, and surprise. Think of these as these are the most easily accessible emotions that anyone will have. Whenever you say, oh, how are you feeling? Someone can probably pretty easily name off one of these. Now, we also have secondary emotions, which are an extension of these 6, but we're going to stick with these primary emotions. Now, follow me here, because in the scriptures, we see in Galatians 5:22-23, it says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, or patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things, there is no law. Isn't it interesting that at least 3 fruits of the Spirit can be identified as secondary and or probably even primary emotions? Love is a secondary emotion of happiness. Joy is a secondary emotion of happiness. Peace is a secondary emotion of happiness. I'm gonna I want to bring up the fact that there's something that we use in the therapy world called an emotional wheel, and it shows us how we can go from primary emotions to secondary emotions. And so when I was preparing for this, I was thinking about the fact that like fruits of the Spirit, if we can link fruits of the Spirit to also some of these primary, secondary emotions, isn't it interesting how something that is humane for us within the flesh is also something that should be instinctual for us in the Spirit, right? We are called to live out and to walk out and to show these fruits of the Spirit. And so next time you meditate on the scripture, think about the fact that this is directly connected to the emotions that you show. This is directly connected to the primary and the secondary emotions that you just naturally have access to. Now, if we move from primary emotions to fruits of the Spirit, now let's talk about biblical figures real quick. Through storytelling, we're shown the emotionality of commonly known biblical figures. I'm talking about Adam and Eve, David, Solomon, Daniel, the 3 Hebrew boys, Jesus. All of these individuals have a story that show us how they emotionally responded to a situation. I think about Adam and Eve, that was the first thing that came to my mind. When Eve ate the fruit, and the Bible, it depicts the fact that Adam and Eve realized that they were naked. That shock, that shame, that's an emotion. When I think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, okay, listen, I don't know about y'all, but I don't want to go into anybody's fiery furnace. I would definitely be terrified. I would be fearful. That's an emotion. Think about Jesus being on the cross. Think about his final words. Think about when he was pleading to God to take this cup from him. That despair, that exhaustion, that's an emotion. We know David and Solomon, they wrote, some of the most famous books of the Bible, and they journeyed through highs and lows. Solomon writes Ecclesiastes talking about what is life even really worth, and you can feel the emotional output. Emotions are in the scriptures, okay? We feel emotions through our primary emotions. We are called to be emotional and to show emotion through the fruits of the Spirit. And then we also have biblical examples of people that we just naturally take scriptural notes from who also showed emotions. Now, let's look at the emotions of God, okay? So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Genesis 1:27. God created man in his own image. God created us in his own image. So what does that mean? If we have emotions, where do we get them from? If he created us in his own image, that means that we got them from him. So I just pulled just a few scriptures for you to show, everyone, the first scripture that you learn in vacation Bible school or in Sunday school is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but shall have eternal life. God had emotion. God has emotion, correction. He loved the world. He loves us, right? That is an emotion. That's also one of the fruits of the Spirit. In Exodus, God declares that he is a jealous God. He cares about us and he wants our attention. He wants all of our love, right? Jealousy, that's an emotion. The Lord has compassion on his servants in Psalms. Compassion, that's an emotion. I will rejoice in doing them good, and I will plant them in this land in faithfulness with all my heart and all my soul. In Jeremiah, again, God was showing that he will rejoice in us doing good. Rejoice is joy, emotion. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness for 40 years until the entire generation of those who had done evil in the sight of the Lord was destroyed. The Lord's anger. We hear a lot about God's wrath, right? God can get upset. He is not human, but he is the all-knowing. He is the only person who knows and feels everything all at the same time. So I want you to consider, if God can be multifaceted, if God can feel all of these emotions, love, joy, anger, compassion, why can't we? It's time that we normalize emotions again, not just because it is a part of our fleshly, like our literal bodily function, but because it's something that God calls us to do. God has emotions, and if he has created us in his image, we're not truly fulfilling the purpose and the plan that God has for us if we suppress those things. We're not walking in everything that he has called us to be if we suppress those emotions, because we are created in his image. His image requires emotions. So I want you all to just kind of take away just some major things. Number one, make an effort to normalize your emotions again. Get comfortable with them, okay? Every time you hear yourself say, oh, I'm not really that emotional of a person, shift that thought. Again, we're changing culture here. Shift that thought, because you are emotional. Everyone is emotional. Some people are more expressive than others, but everyone is emotional, because to be emotional is to be human. Emotions are shown in the scriptures. Okay, emotions are shown. Not only are we called to be emotional by the fruit of the spirit, but also we have examples of other biblical figures who have gone before us and who we already learn from when we do our own Bible studies and when we spend our time with the Lord. God is emotional, and so he also calls you to be emotional. Okay. I am so appreciative of you all sitting down and taking some time to sit down and talk with me and just listen to me share my heart about what it means for us to be emotional beings. This Christian perspective on Black mental health is basically just saying that as a community, it's time for us to really get in touch with something that is natural for us. If you have any questions or if you have any follow-up, please feel free to email me at my email. It's Erin B. Coleman, lmft@gmail.com. I'm more than willing to talk. I love talking to people. Of course, I'm a therapist, but I hope that you all were able to get something out of this presentation. And above all else, remember, it's time for us to normalize emotions again. Thank you so much.